Have you ever felt unjustly judged, pushed aside based on a glance, a preconceived notion? This isn't a story about a simple misunderstanding at an airport. It's the chronicle of a moment when quiet prejudice collided with unimaginable power. It's about Julian Vance, a man holding a $15,000 first-class ticket who was told he didn't belong. It's about a lounge manager, a gatekeeper of trivial privilege, who made a life-altering mistake. And it's about what happens when the response to being denied a seat isn't an argument, but an acquisition. This is the story of how one man didn't just get angry, he got ownership. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was electric with the controlled chaos of departure. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the palpable anticipation of journeys beginning. For Julian Vance, it was merely a sterile corridor connecting one multi-billion-dollar deal to the next. He moved through the throng, not with the hurried anxiety of a tourist, but with the deliberate, unshakable calm of a man who owned the time he walked in. At 38, Julian had cultivated an aura that was both disarming and formidable. He was dressed in what he called his transatlantic uniform, a custom-tailored Loro Piana charcoal suit, unbuttoned to reveal a simple black crewneck sweater, paired with immaculate, hand-stitched leather sneakers from Common Projects. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, its slim profile a subtle nod to a fortune built on discretion and ferocious intelligence. He wasn't old money. He was the new money that bought old money's companies for breakfast. His firm, Vance Capital Partners, specialized in distressed tech assets, turning digital rust into polished gold. His destination today was Zurich to finalize the hostile takeover of Innovator, a struggling but brilliant aerospace software firm. His Global Alliance first-class ticket, a sliver of glossy cardstock worth more than most people's monthly rent, was his key to a few hours of peace before 10 hours of negotiation prep. The key to the Meridian Lounge. The entrance to the lounge was an exercise in minimalist intimidation. Frosted glass doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a reception desk carved from a single block of Italian marble. Behind it stood a woman whose posture was as rigid as the desk she commanded. Her name tag read, Caroline Hess, Senior Lounge Manager. She was in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and eyes that seemed to perform a rapid credit check on every person who approached. Julian placed his ticket and passport on the marble. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. Caroline Hess didn't meet his eyes. Her gaze flickered from his face to his sneakers and back to the documents. A tiny, almost imperceptible frown creased the skin between her eyebrows. She tapped a few keys on her terminal. The silence stretched. It was a practiced, deliberate silence, designed to make people feel they were being scrutinized, audited. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket, sir," she said, the "sir" clipped and sterile. Julian's calm didn't waver. "I doubt that. It was booked by my office this morning. The confirmation is on my phone if you need it. The system is not recognizing the booking code for premium lounge access." She continued, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, as if the effort of typing was a great personal sacrifice. "Are you certain you're at the right lounge?" It was a classic gatekeeper's tactic, insinuate error on the part of the guest. Julian had encountered it a dozen times before, in different forms in different countries. It was the subtle friction of a world that still saw a black man in a sweater and sneakers as an anomaly in spaces like this. "I'm certain," Julian replied, his voice still even. "Global Alliance Flight, 17 to Zurich, first class, the Meridian Lounge. Is there an issue with your scanner?" An older white gentleman in a rumpled Brooks Brothers suit shuffled up behind. Julian flustered and loud. "Afternoon, Caroline. Almost missed my flight to London." He slapped his ticket down. Caroline's entire demeanor transformed. A warm, practiced smile materialized. "Mr. Davies, so good to see you again. Of course, right this way. Let me just process your ticket." She scanned it, and a pleasant chime echoed from her terminal. "There you go. The bar has that Macallan 25 you enjoy. Have a safe flight." Mr. Davies nodded gratefully and bustled past Julian without a second glance. The warm smile vanished the moment her eyes returned to Julian. The mask was back on. "As I was saying, sir," she said, her tone reverting to one of tired impatience, "your access is not registering. It's possible you purchased a ticket that doesn't include lounge privileges. It's a common mistake." The condescension was a physical thing, thick and suffocating in the air. Julian felt a familiar, cold fire ignite in his gut. He had managed multi-billion-dollar funds, stared down hostile boards, and dismantled corporate empires. He was not a man who made common mistakes. "Let me be very clear," Julian said, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more commanding than a shout. "That ticket cost $15,400. It was booked through our corporate account with Goldman Sachs. It includes every privilege Global Alliance offers. The mistake is not mine, so I suggest you try again, or perhaps find a colleague who knows how to operate your system." Caroline's face tightened. She saw his quiet intensity, not as authority, but as aggression. Her training steeped in years of unspoken biases kicked in. She was the protector of this sanctuary of beige carpets and free champagne, and he was in her eyes a threat to its tranquility. "So there is no need to take that tone," she said, her voice rising slightly, attracting the attention of a few other passengers. "If you cannot be processed, I cannot grant you entry. It is our policy. You are welcome to wait at the public gate." She pushed his passport and ticket back across the marble, a small, dismissive shove that felt like a slap. And that was it. The line had been crossed. It wasn't about the comfortable chair, the free drink, or the quiet workspace anymore. It was about the fundamental disrespect. It was about her looking at him and seeing not a first-class passenger, but a problem to be dismissed. Julian Vance stood there for a long moment, the world seeming to slow down. He looked at the frosted glass doors, at the smug, assured expression on Caroline Hess's face. He could have made a scene. He could have called corporate. He could have pulled out his phone and recorded her. But Julian didn't operate on that level. His responses were never proportional. They were overwhelming. He didn't fight battles. He ended wars. He took a slow breath, a strange, serene calm washing over the cold fire. He picked up his passport and ticket. He didn't look angry. He looked thoughtful. "Policy," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "I see." He stepped back from the desk, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number from his favorites. Caroline Hess watched him, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She assumed he was calling the airline's customer service, a futile gesture that would lead to a labyrinth of automated menus. She turned to her computer, ready to forget him. She had no idea that she hadn't just denied a passenger. She had set in motion an avalanche. The call connected on the first ring. "Isabella." Julian said, his voice a stark contrast to the ambient airport noise, calm, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. On the other end of the line, in a sleek Manhattan office overlooking Bryant Park, Isabella Rossi, Julian's chief of staff, sat straight up. She could decode her boss's moods from a single syllable. This tone was one she hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of controlled fury, the eerie quiet, before a Category 5 hurricane makes landfall. "Julian, is everything all right? Are you at the airport?" she asked, her fingers already flying across her keyboard, pulling up his itinerary, ready for any contingency. I am, he confirmed, his eyes fixed on Caroline Hess, who was now primly reorganizing a stack of landing cards, pointedly ignoring him. There's been a change of plans regarding the pre-flight arrangements. I've encountered a policy issue here at the Meridian Lounge. Isabella's mind raced. A policy issue? Julian Vance didn't have policy issues. Policies were things that happened to other people. What do you need? I can get the Global Alliance Executive Liaison on the line right now. We can have the head of North American operations calling you in 5 minutes. No, Julian said simply. The finality in that single word stopped her cold. That's insufficient. This requires a more permanent solution. I need you to get David Smith on the line, and I need the M&A team from Sullivan and Cromwell to set up a conference bridge. Now. Isabella froze. David Smith was Julian's personal attorney, a man who specialized in acquisitions so hostile they bordered on corporate warfare. Sullivan and Cromwell was the legal firm they used for 9-figure deals. Julian, what are you doing? Julian watched as another family, laughing and carefree, was waved through by Carolyn with a beaming smile. The contrast was jarring a spotlight on the deliberate nature of his exclusion. I'm at JFK Terminal 4, he said, speaking to Isabella, but looking directly at Caroline. The Meridian Lounge is operated by a third-party contractor, not the airline itself. I remember seeing it in a prospectus a while back. A hospitality group. Isabella's fingers danced across the Bloomberg terminal. Searching? Yes. The Meridian Lounges globally are owned and operated by Aerolux Hospitality Group, a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings plc. Sterling Holdings, Julian mused. Publicly traded, underperforming for the last 3 quarters. Vulnerable. He paused. Isabella, I want to buy Aerolux. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a fraction of a second, Isabella wondered if this was some kind of elaborate joke. But Julian Vance did not joke about money. He did not joke about business. You want to buy the hospitality group? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The whole thing? Yes, Julian said, as casually as if he were ordering a coffee. Well, a controlling interest will suffice for now. I want it done before my flight takes off. The current delay is 3 hours due to thunderstorms over the Atlantic. That should be enough time. Caroline Hess, hearing snippets of the conversation, words like subsidiary and controlling interest, finally looked over, an expression of mild curiosity on her face. She saw Julian standing there, phone to his ear, his posture relaxed, but his eyes carrying an unnerving intensity. He caught her gaze and gave her a slow, deliberate nod, as if including her in the conversation. It sent a strange chill down her spine. Julian, it's a publicly traded company. A tender offer, due diligence. It would take weeks, months. Isabella protested the sheer audacity of the request, testing the limits of her unflappable composure. We're not making a tender offer. We're buying a person. Find me the majority shareholder. There's always one. A fund, a family. Someone who is ready to sell if the price is right. I want you to find the person who can make a decision today and get them on the phone. Pay whatever premium is necessary. Authorize David to draft a term sheet. Use the liquid assets in the Phoenix Fund. I don't care about the price. I care about the timeline. Before takeoff. He was laying out a corporate raid with the calm of a man ordering a pizza. Each sentence was a command, a step in a devastatingly simple, mind-bogglingly complex plan. Just then, a crackle came over the airport's PA system. Attention passengers on Global Alliance Flight 17 to Zurich. Due to worsening weather conditions, your flight is now delayed by an estimated 5 hours. Julian allowed himself a small, cold smile. "Did you hear that, Isabella? We just got an extension. The universe is on our side." He disconnected the call. He found an uncomfortable seat in the public waiting area, directly opposite the entrance to the Meridian Lounge, positioning himself so that Caroline Hess could see him every time she looked up. He opened his briefcase, took out a tablet, and began reviewing the financials for the Innovate Air deal, his concentration absolute. To any passerby, he was just another traveler waiting for a delayed flight. But Caroline Hess felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. He wasn't looking at her, but she felt watched. There was something about his stillness, his unnerving calm after their confrontation, that was far more unsettling than if he had screamed at her. She tried to dismiss it to focus on her work, but her eyes kept flicking up, drawn to the silent, impeccably dressed man, who was now, for reasons she couldn't possibly comprehend, the most menacing person in the entire terminal. The clock on the wall ticked forward each minute, carrying them all toward a reckoning she could never have imagined. The next 2 hours unfolded in a surreal bubble of intense, high-stakes activity, centered around Julian Vance's uncomfortable airport chair. To the world, he was just a man on his tablet. In reality, he was the command center for a blitzkrieg acquisition. His AirPods were in a silent link to a rapidly assembled virtual war room. On the conference bridge were Isabella David Smith and a hand-picked team of 4 of Sullivan and Cromwell's most ruthless M&A lawyers. "Status," Julian said, his voice low. "We're moving, Julian." Isabella reported, her voice crisp and energized. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the familiar thrill of executing her boss's grand designs. Sterling Holdings' largest single shareholder is the Oak Haven Retirement Fund, holding 28%. They're institutional, slow-moving, no good for us. The second largest, however, is a private family office. The Crimson Equity Group, run by a man named Alistair Finch. He holds a 22% stake. Finch is old school, an activist investor. And according to our intel, he's been looking for a liquidity event to fund a new venture in green energy. "He's our man," Julian stated. "Get him on the line." David's associate is already tracking down his personal number. Should have him within 20 minutes, Isabella confirmed. In the meantime, the team is analyzing Aerolux's financials. They're weaker than we thought. High overhead, low margins, and they're over-leveraged on 3 major airport contracts. The parent company Sterling has been propping them up. From a purely financial standpoint, Julian, it's not a great acquisition. "This isn't a financial acquisition, Isabella," Julian corrected gently. "It's a strategic one. Send the preliminary numbers to me." On his tablet, encrypted files began to appear. Balance sheets, income statements, cash flow analysis. Julian's eyes scanned the columns of numbers, his mind processing the information with terrifying speed. He wasn't just reading the data. He was absorbing the company's soul, its weaknesses, its pressure points. Inside the Meridian Lounge, Caroline Hess was growing increasingly agitated. The 5-hour delay had made the lounge crowded and the passengers irritable. The man she had dismissed, Julian Vance, was still out there. Every time she glanced toward the entrance, he was in the same spot, engrossed in his work. But she'd seen him take out his AirPods. He was on a call, and it had been going for nearly 2 hours straight. The sheer length of it, combined with his unnerving focus, felt wrong. Mr. Davies, the older businessman who had been waved through earlier, sat near the lounge's expansive window, nursing his Macallan. He had a prime view of Julian. He too was intrigued. He'd witnessed the initial confrontation, recognizing the ugly undertones of Carolyn's professionalism. Unlike her, however, Mr. Davies recognized power when he saw it. The suit, the watch. The man's bearing it all pointed to someone of consequence. He wasn't surprised the man was making a fuss. He was surprised by the way he was doing it, quietly, intensely. It was the quiet ones you had to watch out for. "I have Alistair Finch's direct cell," David Smith's voice cut in on Julian's earpiece. "He's on his yacht in the Mediterranean. It's evening there. He's agreed to take the call. Patching him through now." A new voice, smooth and tinged with a British accent, honed by decades of wealth, joined the line. "This is Alistair Finch. I'm told this is a matter of some urgency." "Mr. Finch." Julian began his tone, shifting from commander to collaborator. "My name is Julian Vance of Vance Capital. I have a proposition for you regarding your stake in Sterling Holdings." "Vance Capital," Finch mused. "I know your work. You're the one who carved up Silvertech last year. A bloody but brilliant piece of work. What do you want with a dog like Sterling?" "I'm not interested in Sterling," Julian said. "Only its subsidiary Aerolux Hospitality. I'm prepared to make you an offer for your entire 22% stake in the parent company, a significant premium over market close today." Julian named a price. On the other end of the line, there was a sharp intake of breath. The lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell who had run the numbers began whispering frantically among themselves. The premium Julian was offering was not just significant, it was extravagant. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Vance." Finch said, his casual demeanor gone replaced by the sharp focus of a predator who smells blood. "Why the sudden interest and why the hurry? My bankers would want weeks of due diligence." "My firm has already conducted the necessary due diligence," Julian lied with the utter conviction of a man who could make his lies true. "And as for the hurry, let's just say I've recently become intimately aware of the quality of their customer service, and I see a significant opportunity for improvement, an opportunity I'm willing to pay for." There was a moment of silence, and then Alistair Finch let out a booming laugh. "Good God, son, did one of their lounge dragons give you a hard time? I've been saying for years their service is atrocious. You're going to launch a takeover because you got bad service." "I'm a believer in solving problems at their root," Julian said dryly. The absurdity of it, the sheer magnificent audacity, appealed to Finch's own ruthless instincts. "I like your style, Vance. To hell with the bankers. Send me a term sheet. If the wire transfer hits my account by market, open in London, tomorrow, you have a deal. The wire will be in your account within the hour," Julian promised. "Done," Finch declared. The call ended. On the conference bridge, there was a collective stunned silence. They had just witnessed a hostile takeover initiated from an airport waiting area, sealed in a 10-minute phone call. "You heard the man," Julian's voice cut through the silence, pulling everyone back to reality. "David, get the term sheet to him in the next 5 minutes. Isabella, instruct JP Morgan to execute a wire transfer for—" He glanced at his tablet. "$487 million to the account David provides. Team start drafting the necessary SEC filings. We'll announce the acquisition of a strategic stake before the market opens." Commands were given and received. A flurry of emails, encrypted messages, and secure digital signatures crisscrossed the globe. Julian Vance sat calmly amidst the chaos. He had unleashed the quiet eye of his own hurricane. He looked up his gaze once again, finding Caroline Hess. She was directing a junior staff member to refill a bowl of pretzels, her expression one of immense self-importance. She was arranging deck chairs on a ship she didn't know had just been sold. The paperwork was just a formality. In the world that mattered, the world of money and power, Julian Vance was already her boss. The digital ink on the term sheet was barely dry when the first email arrived. It wasn't sent to Julian, but to the board of Sterling Holdings plc, and by extension, to the CEO of its subsidiary, Aerolux Hospitality. The subject line was brutally simple: Notice of Strategic Stake Acquisition. A second email, this one from David Smith's office, was dispatched to Aerolux's head of North American operations. It was a formal, legally binding notification. Vance Capital Partners, as of 5:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, was now the company's single largest shareholder, with Alistair Finch's board seat, and all associated voting rights transferred to its principal, Mr. Julian Vance. The email concluded with a simple, chilling directive. All operational staff are to extend their full cooperation to Mr. Vance, effective immediately. Julian saw the moment the ripple reached the shore. Inside the lounge, behind the marble fortress of her reception desk, Caroline Hess's desk phone buzzed. She answered it with her customary air of slight annoyance. As she listened, her posture began to change. The rigid spine softened a look of profound confusion washing over her face. She mumbled, "Yes, I understand. But, yes, of course," into the receiver. When she hung up the phone, her hands were trembling slightly. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, scanned the crowded lounge and then darted toward the entrance to the public seating area. They locked onto Julian. He hadn't moved. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Slowly, as if wading through deep water, she walked out from behind her desk. She smoothed her uniform jacket, a nervous, reflexive gesture. Her journey across the plush carpet to the frosted glass doors was the longest walk of her life. The other passengers watched, their curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in the lounge's emotional climate. She pushed the door open and approached Julian, her polished black pumps making no sound on the terminal's linoleum floor. "Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice a strained, uncertain whisper. The confident, dismissive woman from 2 hours ago was gone, replaced by a ghost. Julian slowly removed his AirPods and looked up at her. He didn't speak, letting the silence hang between them, forcing her to continue. I've just received a call from my corporate head office," she stammered. "There seems to have been some sort of transaction. They told me to assist you in any way possible. They said you are a new principal stakeholder." She said the words, but the meaning hadn't fully registered. It was too fantastic, too impossible. It was like a janitor complaining about the building's temperature and responding by buying the entire skyscraper. "That is correct, Miss Hess," Julian said, his voice even and cold. "And as my first act of assistance, I would like to finally gain entry to the Meridian Lounge." He stood up, collected his briefcase and tablet, and walked toward the entrance. Caroline stumbled backward, pushing the door open for him, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. The automatic door slid open, but it felt as though she had personally been forced to grant him passage. He stepped inside. The irritable, murmuring crowd fell silent. Every eye was on him and the pale, trembling manager. Mr. Davies from his armchair watched the scene with a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. He took a slow sip of his Macallan, a toast to a changing of the guard. Julian surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over the beige furniture, the generic art, the wilting flower arrangements. "My associates and I will require a private conference space. That one will do," he said, nodding toward a glass-walled room at the far end of the lounge. "Of course, Mr. Vance," Caroline breathed. "And send in 2 bottles of your best champagne, not for me, for my team. They've had a busy afternoon." He walked toward the conference room, his presence utterly transforming the space. He was no longer a guest. He was the owner inspecting his new flawed property. Before he entered the room, he paused and turned back to Caroline. He looked her directly in the eye. "Oh, and one more thing, Miss Hess. The policy regarding entry to this lounge. It's changed." He gestured toward the entrance where a young family with 2 tired children had just been told by another staff member that their passes weren't valid for this lounge. Their passes are now valid. Anyone with a Global Alliance ticket, regardless of class, is welcome here today. My treat. Inform your staff. Caroline stared at him, dumbfounded. Sir, Mr. Vance, that's against all our protocols. It will cause overcrowding. It will devalue the very concept of the lounge. Julian's face hardened. The mask of calm slipped for just a second, revealing the glacial fury beneath. Ms. Hess, do you understand the difference between protocol and an order from the man who now signs your paycheck? Your job for the remainder of your tenure here is not to quote policy to me. It is to say, yes, Mr. Vance, so let's try again. Inform your staff. The color drained completely from Caroline's face. Yes, Mr. Vance, she whispered. The words were a surrender. He gave a curt nod and disappeared into the conference room, closing the door behind him. For a moment, the entire lounge was frozen. Then, Caroline Hess, looking like a woman in a trance, turned to her junior staff. You heard him, she said, her voice hollow. Let them in. Let them all in. And so they came. The family with the tired children, their faces lighting up with gratitude. The young couple on their honeymoon who had been turned away earlier. The students on a budget trip who had just been hoping to find a working power outlet. The Meridian Lounge, once a bastion of carefully curated exclusivity, was suddenly chaotically democratized. The carefully constructed class barriers which Caroline Hess had spent her career policing were dismantled in a single sentence. She stood by her marble desk, a redundant monument in a new world, watching as her meticulously ordered kingdom descended into a joyous, unpretentious chaos she had fought her entire life to keep at bay. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Julian was back in his element. He was on a video call projected onto a smart screen, the faces of his legal and finance teams arrayed before him. The celebratory champagne had been delivered, but it sat untouched. For Julian, the acquisition of Aerolux wasn't a victory to be savored. It was a tool to be used. The real prize was still hours away in Zurich. All right, the Aerolux play is done. He said, his voice all business. Let's pivot back to Innovate Air. Where are we on the final proposal for their board? I want to make sure the presentation for tomorrow is airtight. They're going to fight the takeover. We need to be ready. Isabella's face appeared on the screen. The deck is finalized. We're focusing on their bloated R&D budget and inefficient supply chain management. Vance Capital's restructuring plan will promise a 20% increase in profitability within 2 years, which should appease the shareholders. Good. Julian nodded. What about their key partners? Any of them likely to get spooked by a hostile takeover? A junior analyst spoke up. Their biggest partnership in the pipeline is with Sterling Holdings plc, ironically. Sterling is trying to get Innovate Air's logistics software integrated across all of its transport and hospitality divisions. It's a massive 10-year licensing deal. The biggest in Innovate Air's history. It's the main thing propping up their valuation right now. Julian froze. Sterling Holdings. He repeated, a sudden sharp edge to his voice. The parent company of Aerolux. The very same. The analyst confirmed, oblivious to the sudden tension. The deal is being personally spearheaded by Sterling's executive VP of Strategic Partnerships, a guy named Robert Hess. He's been working on it for over a year. It's his make-or-break project. The name hit the air in the conference room with the force of a physical blow. Hess. Julian's eyes narrowed. It was too much of a coincidence. He minimized the video call window and instructed Isabella through his earpiece. Isabella ran a background check. Now, Robert Hess, Executive VP at Sterling Holdings. I want to know everything. Marital status, family address, everything." "On it," she replied instantly. Outside the conference room, the lounge was a different world. Children were quietly watching cartoons on their parents' tablets. The bar was serving juice and soda just as often as it was serving fine wine. The atmosphere wasn't one of chaos, but of quiet, grateful relief. The rigid, unspoken rules of class and status had been suspended, and people were simply being people. Caroline Hess, however, was in her own private hell. She was a ghost at the feast watching the desecration of her temple. Her authority was gone. Her staff looked at her with a mixture of pity and fear. She had spent 20 years climbing the ladder of middle management, mastering the art of enforcing rules that weren't hers, all for this feeling of petty power. And in the space of a few hours, it had all been rendered meaningless. She kept glancing at the conference room, at the silhouette of the man who had so effortlessly upended her world. It was personal, she knew. He wasn't just changing policies for the sake of it. He was dismantling her piece by piece, using her own rule book as the blueprint for its destruction. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her husband, Robert. "Landed in Chicago. Rough flight. Big day tomorrow. Closing the Innovate Air deal. Wish me luck. Love you." She stared at the text, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Robert was so proud of this deal. He talked about it constantly. It was his path to the C-suite, the culmination of his career. Their future, their mortgage on the big house in Connecticut, their kids' college funds. It all felt tied to the success of this one project. A quiet chime sounded in Julian's ear. Isabella was back. "Got it," she said, her voice tight. "Robert Hess, married for 22 years. Wife's name is Caroline." Julian leaned back in his chair, the full picture snapping into focus with brutal clarity. It was a perfect, terrible circle. The universe didn't just serve karma, it presented it on a silver platter, gift-wrapped in irony. The woman who had tried to humiliate him, who had judged him unworthy based on the color of his skin and the brand of his sneakers, was the wife of the man whose entire career now rested in the palm of his hand. By taking over Innovateur, Julian would become the ultimate arbiter of the partnership deal with Sterling Holdings. Robert Hess's make-or-break project was now Julian's to approve or deny. Julian looked through the glass wall at Caroline, who was now staring at her own phone, a worried expression on her face. He felt no triumph, no elation, just a profound, weary sense of cosmic justice. The hard karma the universe had prepared for Caroline Hess was not something he had to invent. It was already in motion. All he had to do was let it happen. He now understood that buying the lounge wasn't the end game. It was merely the opening move in a much larger and far more devastating checkmate. The door to the conference room opened. Julian stepped out, his face an impassive mask. The convivial atmosphere of the democratized lounge seemed to hush as he moved through it. He walked directly to the reception desk where Carolyn was standing, lost in her own worried thoughts. She looked up as he approached, flinching almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Vance, is there anything else I can get for you?" "Yes, Caroline," he said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it spoken in his low, controlled voice was deeply unsettling to her. "You can tell me about your husband." The question was so unexpected, so far out of the realm of possibility, that Caroline could only stare at him, her mouth slightly agape. My husband, I don't understand." "Robert Hess," Julian clarified, leaving no room for confusion. "Executive VP of Strategic Partnerships at Sterling Holdings. I'm told he's working on a rather important project, a partnership with a company called Innovate Air." Every drop of blood seemed to drain from Caroline's face. She gripped the edge of the marble desk to steady herself. The professional and the personal two worlds she had always kept separate were colliding with the force of a head-on crash. How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know that because in approximately 12 hours I will be the new owner of Innovate Air," Julian stated not cruelly, but as a simple, undeniable fact. "Which means your husband's career-defining deal will land on my desk for final approval." The full catastrophic weight of the situation finally landed on Caroline. Her small act of prejudice, her casual everyday bigotry, had not just cost her her dignity or her authority in this trivial little lounge. It had placed a sniper's target squarely on her husband's career, on her family's financial future, on the entire life she had so carefully constructed. Tears welled in her eyes. The carefully maintained facade of the stern professional manager crumbled, revealing the terrified woman beneath. "Please," she begged, her voice thick with desperation. "Please don't. It wasn't... it had nothing to do with him. It was me. I was wrong. I am so sorry." The apology, when it finally came, was raw and pathetic. It wasn't the product of a change of heart, but of pure, unadulterated fear. Julian listened, his expression unchanged. "You're right," he said. "It had everything to do with you, and sorry doesn't fix it. Do you understand what you did today, Caroline? You didn't just deny a customer. You made a business decision. You, as a representative of Aerolux and its parent company Sterling Holdings, decided that I was not the kind of person you wanted in your establishment." He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower still. "My business, my entire philosophy, is built on one thing: identifying and eliminating inefficiencies. And what I see in you, in your behavior, is a profound brand misalignment. How can Sterling Holdings possibly hope to partner with a forward-thinking global tech firm like Innovate Air when its own frontline management is operating with such outdated and inefficient prejudices?" He was using the soulless clinical language of a corporate boardroom to describe her racism, and it was somehow more damning than any insult he could have hurled. He was recasting her personal failing as a corporate liability. "That's the question I'll be asking myself when your husband's proposal comes across my desk," he continued. "Is a partnership with Sterling Holdings a sound investment? Or, given what I've learned about the company culture today, is it a potential risk to my new asset? Her world was collapsing in on her, and the architect of its destruction was standing right in front of her, calm and resolute. "Please," she wept, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "It was just a mistake, a terrible mistake. I'll do anything. I'll resign. Just don't punish my husband for what I did." Just then, her phone began to ring. The caller ID displayed a picture of her smiling husband, Robert. The timing was so brutally perfect, it felt like something out of a Greek tragedy. She looked from the ringing phone to Julian's unforgiving eyes, her face a mask of pure panic. "Answer it," Julian said softly. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Her hand shaking violently, she swiped to answer and put the phone to her ear. "Robbie." His voice came through tinny and frantic, loud enough for Julian to overhear. "Caroline, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from the CEO. He's in a panic. Something about a new major shareholder, Vance Capital. He's saying our whole deal with Innovate Air is in jeopardy. He mentioned an incident at JFK. Caroline, what did you do?" Caroline Hess closed her eyes. There was no escape. The wave she had created had traveled across the ocean and was now roaring back to drown her. She couldn't speak. She could only stand there, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the sound of her life falling apart. Julian gave her one last, long look. There was no pleasure in his eyes, no victory. There was only a profound and final sense of consequence. He had done what he set out to do. He had solved the problem at its root. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his conference room to prepare for his flight to Zurich. The hard karma had arrived, and its justice was more complete and more devastating than he could ever have planned. The final boarding call for Flight 17 to Zurich echoed through the terminal. Julian and his team, having packed up their mobile command center, walked out of the conference room. The lounge was still full, but a sense of order had been restored. The new guests, the ones previously deemed unworthy, were respectful, grateful for the unexpected comfort. They watched Julian pass with a mixture of curiosity and reverence, whispering among themselves about the man who had torn down the velvet rope. Caroline Hess was gone. After the phone call with her husband, she had simply vanished, abandoning her post. In her place, a flustered but polite junior manager was trying his best to manage the unusual situation. He saw Julian approaching and immediately stiffened. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice nervous. "Thank you. We'll be returning to standard operational procedures now." Julian paused. "No, you won't," he said, his voice carrying the easy weight of absolute authority. "Send a memo to all North American Meridian lounges. Effective immediately, we are piloting a new Hospitality First initiative. Any passenger with a same-day ticket on a Global Alliance partner airline who is facing a delay of 3 hours or more is to be granted complimentary access, space permitting. We're in the business of hospitality, not exclusion. We'll track the costs against the gains in customer loyalty. That's the new policy." The young manager stared, stunned, into silence. Julian was not just punishing one employee, he was fundamentally restructuring the company's ethos on the fly. He was turning his personal experience into a system-wide doctrine. "Yes, Mr. Vance," the manager finally managed to say. "Right away." Julian nodded and proceeded toward the jet bridge. As he was about to board, he heard a voice call his name. It was Mr. Davies. The older businessman approached him, his hand extended. "Mr. Vance, my name is Arthur Davies. I saw what happened earlier, and I saw what you did here. In my 40 years in business, I've seen a lot of power plays. Most are just ego. But this was different. This was biblical." Julian shook his hand. "It was just business, Mr. Davies." "No, my boy, it wasn't," Davies said, his eyes twinkling. "It was a lesson. A very, very expensive lesson about the difference between cost and value. You taught that woman and this whole company that respect isn't a perk. It's the baseline. The world needs more of that." He smiled. "Have a safe flight and good luck in Zurich, though I suspect you don't need it." Julian boarded the plane and settled into his first-class suite. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, he looked out the window at the lights of the terminal. He felt no lingering anger, only a quiet resolution. He hadn't set out to destroy Caroline Hess's life. He had simply refused to allow his own to be devalued. The consequences were hers alone. His phone buzzed. It was a new text from Isabella. "Robert Hess has tendered his resignation from Sterling Holdings, effective immediately. The Innovate Air deal is ours unencumbered." Julian read the message, then switched his phone to airplane mode. He closed his eyes not in triumph, but in preparation. The battle at JFK was over. The war for Innovate Air in Zurich was about to begin. The lounge, the money, the drama. It was all just a prelude. For Julian, Vance power wasn't about winning fights. It was about creating a world where you no longer had to fight them. And tonight, he had bought himself one small piece of that world. The plane angled toward the sky, leaving the city and its ghosts behind. 1 year later, the world was different. Or at least Julian Vance's corner of it was. He stood not in the stale, recycled air of an airport, but on a cantilevered balcony overlooking a sprawling campus of glass and reclaimed timber nestled in the rolling hills outside Zurich. This was the new global headquarters of Innovator, now a fully integrated and thriving division of Vance Capital. The hostile takeover had been a resounding success, a masterstroke of restructuring that was already being taught as a case study at Harvard Business School. The acquisition, however, was rarely mentioned without its famous preamble, the legend of the JFK Lounge. The story had taken on a life of its own. It had leaked, as all such stories do, first in whispers on Wall Street, then in a detailed exposé in the Wall Street Journal, titled The $1 Billion Complaint. Julian had become an unlikely folk hero in certain circles. Memes had appeared online, his face superimposed on a king's body, sitting on a throne of airport lounge chairs. He was dubbed the Lounge King, the man who responded to bad service with a leveraged buyout. Isabella Rossi, now COO of the entire Vance European portfolio, stood beside him, holding a tablet. "The quarterly reports are in for Aero Lux," she said, a clear note of satisfaction in her voice. The Vance mandate, as the press has taken to calling it, is a certifiable success. Customer satisfaction scores are up 400%. The loyalty program has seen a 60% increase in enrollment from non-traditional business travelers. And the most beautiful part: after an initial dip, profits are up 12%. The free press and brand rehabilitation from being the world's most welcoming airport lounge is worth more than we ever could have spent on marketing. Julian nodded, a faint smile on his lips. Goodwill is an asset. My old mentor used to say that. Turns out he was right. He had done more than just implement the Hospitality First initiative. He had spearheaded a complete overhaul of Aero Lux. The bland beige interiors of the Meridian lounges were replaced with designs by local artists. The dress codes were abolished. The staff underwent rigorous new training, focused not on policing entry, but on providing genuine assistance. He had turned a symbol of sterile exclusion into a network of celebrated layover destinations. But every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every echo implies a source. While Julian's world expanded, the world of Caroline and Robert Hess had irrevocably shrunk. They had been forced to sell the house in Connecticut. The fallout from the JFK incident had made Robert Hess radioactive in the upper echelons of the corporate world. He hadn't been fired from Sterling Holdings. He had been forced into a humiliating resignation to save the deal, a deal that was already dead. He eventually found another job, a vice presidency, at a smaller, less prestigious firm in the Midwest. It was a respectable position, but for a man who had been within touching distance of the C-suite, it was a life sentence in mediocrity. The whispers followed him. He was the man whose wife's prejudice had cost a multi-billion-dollar corporation its most promising partnership. Caroline's fate was quieter and in many ways crueler. Her punishment wasn't a matter of public record. It was a slow, private erosion of self. She now lived in a modest suburban home where the roar of planes from the nearby regional airport was a constant mocking reminder of the life she had lost. She was unemployed. No hospitality group would touch her. Her name was an internal red flag, a symbol of the ultimate customer service failure. One Tuesday afternoon, while shopping for groceries at a brightly lit supermarket, she overheard two women in line behind her talking. "Did you see that feature on 60 Minutes about that billionaire Julian Vance?" one asked. "The guy who bought the airport lounge because the manager was rude to him." "Oh, the Lounge King, I love that story," the other replied. Can you imagine being that manager? She must be the most hated woman in America, probably living under a rock somewhere. Caroline froze her hand hovering over a carton of milk, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was a ghost, an anonymous cautionary tale. The women paid for their groceries and left, never noticing the pale, trembling woman next to them, the living embodiment of the story they had just recounted, with such casual glee. She had spent her career making people feel small and invisible. Now invisibility was her permanent condition. That was her karma, not poverty, but a profound and inescapable irrelevance. Back in Zurich, Julian's thoughts were interrupted by a chime on his phone, a flight reminder. New York, then on to Tokyo. Another deal, another city. Later that day, he found himself once again at an airport. This time, it was the newly redesigned Meridian Lounge in Zurich. The entrance was warm and welcoming, all polished concrete and light wood. A young, sharply dressed manager with a warm smile greeted him at the desk. "Welcome to the Meridian, Mr. Vance." The manager said, his eyes bright with genuine respect. "It is an honor to have you." Julian simply smiled and nodded, handing over his ticket like any other passenger. "Thank you. It's good to be here." He walked inside. The space was vibrant, filled with a diverse mix of travelers, families, students, backpackers, and suits all coexisting. He saw Arthur Davies sitting in an armchair by the window reading a newspaper. The old man looked up, saw Julian, and raised his glass in a silent, knowing salute. Julian got a coffee and found a seat not in a secluded corner, but in the main area among the quiet hum of his fellow travelers. He didn't need a private room anymore. He had finally achieved the peace he had sought a year ago. It wasn't about the purchase, the power, or the revenge. It had never been. It was about creating a space where a man in a sweater and sneakers could sit undisturbed and prepare for his journey. He had bought the entire lounge, but what he had truly purchased, what he had finally secured, was something far more valuable, a simple, quiet seat. And in doing so, he had made sure there would be a seat for everyone else, too. This wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a masterclass in the nature of modern power. Julian Vance demonstrated that true influence isn't about raising your voice, but about raising your stake. He faced a moment of casual demeaning prejudice and responded not with anger, but with overwhelming force, reminding us that sometimes the most effective way to change the rules is to buy the entire game. The story of Caroline Hess is a chilling cautionary tale about karma, a reminder that the world is smaller than we think, and the consequences of our biases can ripple outward, touching everything we hold dear. Her small act of exclusion triggered a corporate avalanche that buried her career and her husband's. What did you think of Julian's response? Was it a proportionate reaction or a terrifying display of unchecked power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories where the tables are turned and justice is served in the most unexpected ways.